In this installment of Mimo Reads, I'll be discussing Try Not to Be Strange, The Curious History of the Kingdom of Redonda by Michael Hingston. Maybe I just wasn't paying much attention at the time, but when I first read the press release for this book, I thought it was going to be about the culture, relationships, and workshops of fictitious writers who've established their personal civilization away from the public eye. Going into the actual book, I quickly realized this isn't the case whatsoever. And if you ask me, it's a darn shame in a way, because it's a novel concept that Hingston could have definitely pulled off with his whimsical, inquisitive writing style. Instead, we learn about Hingston's research of, and eventual trip to, an uninhabited Caribbean island named Redonda, characterized by what is essentially an ongoing inside joke among actual writers across history that they're its rulers. For what it's worth, I'm glad he chose to focus on a subject no one really knows much about, if at all. I think it would motivate people to research the benefits of preserving uninhabited islands, like flood control, clean water and air, pollination, recycled nutrients, waste breakdown, and enhanced soil fertility and retention. It doesn't have to stop at fuel for trivia night, and this definitely applies to other lands as well. If we're going to look at it from a literary perspective, though, this book could probably get us to rethink how we view writers in a collective, such as them having a sense of humor or bonding over something unique, which humanizes them and inspires those of us who are or take an interest in literature and publishing to connect more meaningfully with each other. It might also encourage niche writers to capture the right kind of audience who will appreciate their particular brand values in the long term and form a community around them. After all, it's less risky to enter a market that doesn't have as much competition, so they're less likely to lose their audience. Unfortunately, the novel has quite a bit working against it that makes it hard for me to recommend it to the average niche reader. And I realize how much that sounds like an oxymoron. But I reckon you'll understand what I mean in a minute. Hingston elected to spend the majority of the novel detailing a select few writers who were old white men with very controversial ideas and behaviors, to say the least. Not only are practically all of them unlikable, but the fact that Hingston dedicated more pages to the unsavory parts of their personal lives than whatever salvageable contributions they might have had really shows the need to hold people like this accountable and stop placing them on pedestals for creating one or two decent works we like, to say the least. Not to mention how desperately we must support and highlight diverse creators who aren't looking to discriminate against or endanger the lives of others and can paint an accurate picture of their experiences. Speaking of experiences, I was frustrated by Hingston's apparent reluctance to further discuss the people from these places mentioned in the book, like Montserrat. Unlike the writers, they sounded very empathetic and human. And that's not getting into the virtual absence of women's contributions to Redonda's legacy. This book is not incredibly well paced, as most of it simply discusses these writers and doesn't include very many actual interactions that wouldn't have otherwise made me feel so detached from it all. Only at the end does Hingston detail his visit to Redonda, and by that point, I found it hard to be excited about his experience. I don't mind the idea of deciding for yourself what a story means to you, but in this case, when we don't have concrete themes to work with, I, and I'm sure others, aren't particularly compelled to discover that why and care about it. I believe the best way to approach a premise like this is to go all in with imagining conversations between these writers. When I was studying criminology during my bachelor years, I had this assignment that prompted me to write a hypothetical interview script between myself and several theorists regarding the book Proxy by Alex London, in which they debate with each other on aspects of the novel I'd ask them about. I'd write everyone's dialogue based on what can be known of their works and perspectives. Not only would something like this help keep to certain themes, but it could also teach readers, and especially other writers, about articulating different viewpoints and how spectral they could be, debating an argumentation, calling attention to neglected or underrepresented issues, getting creative with voice and characterization, adding to knowledge, and applying ideas that you've internalized however they make sense to you. This would probably stick better in people's minds and galvanize them in that regard, as opposed to just being fed information they maybe won't know what to do with. On a side note, I would love to release my assignment someday on Patreon if I gain enough of a following. Let me know if you'd be interested in reading it in the comments below. If you are curious about the novel, even just for the premise alone, my thoughts notwithstanding, I'll have the link in the comments below for you to learn about and purchase it. Thanks for listening!